Okay, we are now in chapter 11, sexuality and gender. Again, this is going to be another fast one. We don't really get too in depth in this chapter, but I know it's a very interesting one. And again, you can always take in your undergrad, you can take a specific class called sexuality. I think it's called human sexuality. I took that class. It was very, I mean, it was whoa. It's an elective, not for the faint of heart. Um, but it's a very interesting class in learning, people's sexuality, their gender, how they identify, especially with the, 'cause our times that we're living in. I really feel that this is one of the most important chapters, but we don't go too in depth in general psych. So let's just move on. All right, again, we start with a vignette, carries you way through all the way through. Okay, so let's talk about some terminology, some differences between these three terms. So your sexuality encompasses everything that makes you sexual. So your activities, your attitudes towards sex, and your behavior sexually. Sex itself is male, female, or intersex based on biological characteristics, and a sexual act such as intercourse. That is also another meaning of sex. So you've got your two meanings, male, female, or actual engagement. And then gender is different. Some people get sex and gender confused, but gender is the dimension of masculinity or femininity that one feels based on their social, cultural, and psychological characteristics. So those are just the three terminologies of it. So history on this research, the early research focused on rats because a lot of animal studies were used when looking at different characteristics. The methodologies use surveys, interviews, case studies, and experiments. So when researching sex, these are the research methods that are currently used. Again, we're skipping that. Your sex determination, again, this is just based on when you're born. This is what designates you as male or female. Um, so the terms I want you to know are these three here: androgens, testosterone, and then your estrogen. Androgens are the male hormones secreted in the testes in males and by the adrenal glands in both males and females. Some people actually do not know that females possess that um, as well as testosterone. So that's an androgen that plays a role in determining whether the fetus develops male or female genitals. So that is the kind of the deciding factor of if one becomes male or female biologically. And then if the Y chromosome is not present, so that's the genetic female, then the gonads will develop into ovaries. And estrogen is the female hormone secreted primarily by the ovaries and by the adrenal glands, and again, both males and females. Again, if you really want to understand biology of sexuality and gender, this is an amazing class to take. All right, so distinguishing between males and females, the genetic sex of the fetus is determined at conception. Possible to ascertain genetic sex by testing the blood of the mother at 7 weeks into pregnancy. Fetal genital anatomy can be determined by an ultrasound at the end of the first trimester with about 70% accuracy. That's why a lot of people want to find out if they're having a boy or girl. So usually they get tested about 20 weeks or about 4 months. Puberty period when notable changes occur in physical development, leading to your sexual maturity. This is when boys' voices deepen, girls start their first period, which is called menarche. Um, Primary and secondary sex characteristics are coming into play. And again, menarche is the first menstruation, and then spermarche is the first ejaculation. Those are the technical terms for that. So why are girls getting their periods so young? That's kind of the big question nowadays. There's a lot of people discussing it's the food, it's the environment, it's the stuff that's the chemicals. So the average age of a girl's first period is about 12 years old. Um, the onset of breast development, that's called Philarche, is more indicative of the onset of puberty, but the average age is also declining. Um, we really can skip over this part. So intersexual, that's having conflicted or ambiguous biological indicators of male or female in sexual structures and organs. About 1% of infants are found to have intersex traits at birth. The differences of sex development, you have these two syndromes. There's Klinefelter syndrome, and they are born with the XXY chromosome, and then Turner syndrome is born with XO chromosome. Again, human sexuality class will go very much in depth in this. And if you get your master's degree and you take human sexuality, it goes even further into this. Okay, so gender identity, feeling of or sense of being male, female, or an alternative gender, and compatibility, contentment, and conformity with one's gender. Non-binary, this used to not be in psychology textbooks. Now it is. More terminology is being put into the books. And this is to be sensitive and aware of people that do have gender identity issues, and there needs to be this sense of inclusion. And in doing that, these terms are being put into psych books. So non-binary is a term used by some people who experience their gender identity and or gender expression as falling outside the categories of man and woman. Gender roles are the collection of actions, beliefs, and characteristics that a culture associates with masculinity and femininity. What you notice in this chapter, it's heavily on terms. And the reason why you're going to see that this chapter is more terminology, it's because it's so new. And when I say new, the feelings and the associations are not new, but all of the new assignments, the new roles, those are new. So I would say probably in the next decade or so, you're going to see an explosion in this chapter. Okay, again, we're not in class to do this, would be great, but we're not there. All right, children seem to develop gender roles by actively processing information, especially behaviors they observe. Using this information, they develop a variety of gender-specific rules. So your schemas are your psychological or mental guidelines that dictate how to be masculine or feminine. When gender roles are violated, memory is impaired. And, a lot of parental involvement comes into play when we're looking at gender schemas, because parents have the largest role in their child's development and who they become. And if they're told that they have to be a certain way or act a certain way or feel a certain way, that's when that gender confusion comes into play. So it's important as a parent to be very sensitive to a child when they're playing games, or when they're exploring their identity. Instead of shaming them, parents need to be more involved. They need more education on how to just love their children and accept them for who they are. So biology and gender, growing body of literature points to a link between testosterone exposure in utero and specific play behaviors. Research using eye tracking technology reveals that baby girls spend more time looking at dolls, while boys focus more time on trucks. This is more of a just kind of general specific. Um, Oh, this is, you can look at this in the book. Again, this follows in part of the vignette. Gender role stereotypes, strong ideas about nature of males and females begin to form around age 3, held tightly by young children, apparent in marketing, media, and academic settings. And then androgyny is the tendency to cross gender role boundaries, exhibiting behaviors associated with both genders. James Charles is now finally in our psychology books because of his explosion with, him being, either, from what I see, you either love him or you hate him. But he's very boisterous in his thoughts and his beliefs and his actions. So I'm glad to see that somebody like James Charles is in our psychology books. All right, again, more terminology so that you just understand the differences. Transgender, people whose gender identity and expression do not typically match the gender assigned to them at birth, can be temporary or persistent. Almost 1 million individuals in the US, so about 0.4%, consider themselves transgender. And then transsexual are individuals who seek or undergo a social transition to the other gender and who may make changes to their body through surgery and medical treatment. And again, if you take this class, if you decide to get your master's degree, you will actually see in class the whole process, the surgery, everything of this. It's really cool. Gender dysphoria is now the only thing that's in the DSM that is a psychological disorder. So they took out being homosexual out of the disorder, which thankfully they should have, because it is not, as we see as clinicians, it's not a disorder. But gender dysphoria, that's a disorder because that's the discrepancy between natal gender and gender identity that leads to significant experiences as distress. So again, anything that's distressful, dysfunctional, deviant, and dangerous, that's a disorder. And because gender identity can be confusing, it can be distressful based on people, places, and things, that is a disorder. So that is not meant to be a negative thing. All right, so we're going to skip through this, talking about gender differences in aggression. We don't really need to cover that right now. Let's see, that. 10,000 distinct sexual responses of 320. Okay, so this is some studies that have been done. This is talking about differences that you notice between men and women's sexual responses. Okay, we can get into this like all day long, but basically we're talking about when a male and a female is excited, when they plateau, and when they orgasm. So this you can see, males are very just kind of like whoop, whoop, whereas females are more kind of like doot, 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 doot. They have to climb the ladder, and then there's this down resolution, and then it kind of peaks, and then it goes down. That's why like men after they have sex, it's like boom, night, gotta go to bed. And then, okay, let's boogie. Okay, sexual orientation. This is a person's enduring sexual attraction to individuals of the same sex, opposite, or both. So you've got heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, and asexual. And then a continuum that includes dimensions of sexuality, attraction, desire, and emotions. So when we look at like percentages, estimates of the gay and lesbian population range from 1%, referring only to same-sex behavior, to 24% any sexual attraction to the same sex. Young women show greater fluidity in their sexual attractions and orientation. It kind of makes sense with females, especially younger females. All right, so how sexual orientation develops. Genetics and sexual orientation. So monozygotic twins, which are identical twins, were moderately more likely than dizygotic twins, or your fraternals, to have the same sexual orientation. Heritability estimates for men range from 25 to 50%, substantially lower for women. A key flawed study on the existence of a gay gene found several hundred common genes between gay male siblings, and there's no replication of that study that's been published as of yet. When we look at brain differences, small group of neurons in the hypothalamus are twice as big in homosexual men, and the corpus callosum is thicker in homosexual men, which shows us that, hello, there are biological components here. It is not, we could get into this all day long, but people just need to understand that there are differences. There is biological components to this, and people just need to be educated. All right. Biology of sexual orientation. The number of older brothers a man has seems to be associated with the probability of his homosexuality. Interestingly, this link has been found to be more prominent among right-handed men. Again, that goes further into the book if you want to look into that. All right, so differences in sexual orientation are universal, found throughout history. Non-heterosexual people in the US are subjected to harassment, violence, and prejudice even though we are more accepting of this, and when I say we, I don't mean me, I mean in general people, there's still a lot of hate out there. It's going to take, nothing is ever going to be perfect, ever. So there's always going to be biases, there's always going to be prejudice and violence, but it is getting better because of social media, because of acceptance, because of knowledge and education and information. All right, the Department of Justice officials contend that the 1964 Civil Rights Act does not protect individuals from being fired because they are gay, lesbian, or transgender. Culture, there is not worldwide acceptance of homosexuality. People across the world are routinely victimized for their sexuality. It's more accepted in North America, Europe, and Latin America, but less accepted in Africa, Russia, and regions of Asia. And this is all cultural. Um, and strategic reflection is urgently needed, which is what I was saying. We need more education. So people that, are in this group, it would be amazing, to, fight this cause, maybe to be a victim advocate for people that are going through um, these, some of the horrific things that happen. And, I always think whatever you are going through, whoever you are an expert in that field. So when I do counseling with people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, whatever, and they just need an outlet, I let them know, okay, this floor is yours. You are the expert in this. Teach me. Teach me what I can learn so that I can teach others. So that's kind of what I mean when, you are the expert. All right, we are going to skip over that. We are going to, oh, this is just cute. But we're going to skip over that. All right, orgasms. What's the point other than it feels good? Male orgasms have a clear purpose. Excuse me, release of sperm that is essential for reproduction. The function of female orgasm is less clear. Excuse me. One model suggests it induces ovulation. They don't talk about anything about how it feels. Whatever. All right, so selecting a mate, what are you looking for? So from an evolutionary standpoint, men and women have the same goal, reproduction. Even though it's not like, oh, I'm with you because I want to have a baby. It's just that is evolutionarily speaking the goal. Yet men and women have different roles in reproduction. Women have biological constraints of pregnancy, breastfeeding. Men are able to father hundreds and thousands of children with their sperm. Men and women seek different qualities in a mate. Women favor mates who appear to be good providers, while men are looking for attractive and youthful. So if we were in class together, we would be diving into this. And maybe it's something that when we meet, we can actually talk more about sexuality. But again, women and men look at sex and different qualities much differently. All right, this is, I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to skip over a lot of this because I think this would be really good to go over in class. About 77% of American adults report they engaged in intercourse by the age of 20. I think that number is a lot lower. Of those currently having sex, 97% engaged in sex before marriage. That's a lot. Married people have more sex than unmarried people. Believe it or not, a very stereotypical thing is to say that once you get married, you don't have sex. No, actually, quite the opposite. Okay, the sex we have. So what's going on? This is on page 429 in more in depth related to this chart. But penile vaginal intercourse, the average frequency in a month for men is 5.2%. For women, it's 4.8. For oral sex, 2.3. For women, 1.9. Anal sex is only 0.10% for men, and then 0.08 for women. And then masturbation, 4.5% for men. It's statistically significant between men and women on that spectrum. All right, so sexual activity in relationships, so marriage. In the US, the average age of first marriage is 27 for women, 29 for men. Women, well, both women and men are now getting married later in life because people want to have their careers, go to college, have fun. So it's not like old school where they got married when they were 16, 17, 18 years old. The odds for 10-year marriages are 68% for women, 70% for men. And then odds for 20-year marriages are 52% for women and 56% for men. What is alarming, but it's kind of the new, it's not the new norm, but it is a norm that's sad, is that about 50% of first marriages end in divorce, and after that it jumps to, I think it's about 72%, then it goes to like 80 something. And it's just really sad because it's very easy to get divorced. I mean, it's not easy when I say if you have children and there's, custody and all that, then it's harder, and then there's a lot of money involved in court battling. But if it's just an amicable two-person divorce, it's just go to the courthouse and get a divorce, and it's like, boom, never happened. So I think it should be a lot harder to get married, to be honest with you. I think there should be classes you have to take and understand what it is to actually be married. It's not about the wedding. That part is fun, but it's like what happens after the wedding. With monogamous relationships, most Americans are monogamous. 65 to 85% have always been faithful to their spouse. I know that sounds like, whoa, not true, but those are the statistics out there. And about 4 to 5% report consensually non-monogamous or open relationships. All right, so sexual activity and gender differences in the US, 54% of men report thinking about sex every day or several times a day. 67% of women report thinking about sex only a few times a week or a few times a month. Men report higher frequencies of masturbation, changing attitudes about casual sex before marriage or hookups. We see that's way more prevalent with those social media apps like Tinder, the wipe. All right, then you have behavior, and when we look at undergraduates, those are your percentages: kissing, sexual touching above the waist, sexual touching below, oral sex, receiving oral sex, and then actual sex. All right, masturbation is more common than partnered sexual activities among adolescents and people over the age of 70. There's a whole reason for that. In one study, researchers found that aging did not seem to adversely affect interest in sexual activity. Many of the respondents in their 60s, 70s, and 80s were still sexually active. I know people think that, they can't imagine their grandparents having sex. Ugh. They can't imagine them, anything other than it. But actually, if you don't know this, the highest rate of STDs is in the villages out like Orlando. And that the villages are elderly community. They've got STDs out the wazoo. Yeah, they're having sex, lots of it. They're like, it's kind of interesting because if you take a class in sexuality, you might have to interview somebody regarding sex. And it's very interesting to interview an elderly person because you will definitely learn a lot. All right, so how we define what constitutes sex. Some people are like, oral sex is not sex. I didn't cheat because it was oral sex. Well, is oral sex sex? Many teenagers say no, believing it doesn't possess a health risk. As more teens become infected with STIs, STIs are the sexually transmitted infections. It's critical for teen-targeted sexual education programs to educate teens on the risks of oral sex. I think it's important for sex education. I don't think it's something that, should be swept under the rug. I'm not a scientist, but I'm in the sciences. And so when I think of it like that, there needs to be safe information. Kids need to know, okay, what's out there, what is going on. It's important for researchers, medical professionals, and those involved in health promotion to use clear, behaviorally specific terminology when communicating about sex. We don't need to babyfy it. We don't need to we need to say what it is and be very specific about the terminology. New thing that's going on is like, hey, I don't ever do that because that can always bite you in the butt. All right, so sexting, sext you later. Sexting using cell phones to exchange text messages with sexually explicit words or images. Listen, you might think that that's cool. You might pictures of your significant other or whatever. But me as a clinician, me as a teacher, I have seen it literally ruin people's lives. So if you even have to, if that little voice says, should I do this? Don't do it. I know in the moment you think, oh, we're going to be together forever. And I'm sure many of you know situations where you probably have stories that we could talk about. So think it through. 1 in 7 adolescents use digital technology to share sexual pictures of themselves. Even more have received such images from others. Young people who sext are more likely to have sex and take sexual risks, such as having unprotected sex. And then when sexting is between two consenting adults, of course, it may be harmless. All right, sex education, school's primary place for it. States with a greater emphasis on abstinence, as reflected in state laws and policies, have higher teenage pregnancies and birth rates. Why? Hello? Because we're not giving them information about it. We say, don't do it. And when you do that, what do kids want to do? They want to do it. So we got to be smart and educate them. Research shows that formal sex education increases safe sex practices, reducing the likelihood of disease transmission, and decreases teen pregnancy rates. I understand that there are people that will argue this, especially when it comes to, religion. And I am very, I'm just, I don't need to put it out there, but I go to church. I'm spiritual. But there, as a clinician, you have got to look at the whole picture. I want my children to be educated. I want them to know what is out there. I don't want them to just feel like, oh, I don't know. Oh, mom said not to do it. You can't do that. You can't effectively parent your children and think that they're just going to go out there and be safe, because they're not. Because kids are kids. Brains aren't fully developed. They take riskier behaviors. They need to be educated. And that's my spiel on that. All right, sexual dysfunction. This, oh my, you will learn so much about this if you take human sexuality. You're going to learn about all of the sexual dysfunctions, all of the disorders for men and women. Not really going to go into that in this class. But when you look at the problems, you have desire, arousal, orgasm, and pain. And again, when we meet in class, we can kind of go over it, but it's not something I go really deep into. The STIs, your bacterial infections, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, your viral infections or your genital herpes, and your human papilloma virus. So fun fact with HPV, used to be 91% of everybody that had sex got HPV. Now it's down to 80%. That's still huge. And it doesn't mean there's a bazillion different strains of HPV. There's only a few strands that are actually the dangerous ones, but it's really important that, if you look around you, with 80% of people that have sex have HPV, that's like 1 in what? You do the math. Ugh. So you gotta be careful. HIV and AIDS, human immunodeficiency virus spread through the transfer of bodily fluids. This is not a gay disease. Worldwide, HIV is the leading cause of death, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it is the leading killer. HIV is the virus. You could live with HIV for the rest of your life now. AIDS is what ends up killing you. And that is your body becomes so compromised and there is no cure for AIDS. So the rate of living once you're diagnosed with AIDS is about a year. But as far as HIV goes, you can live your whole life with HIV as long as you take the cocktail, is what they call it. All right, so normal is relative. So we have our sexual scripts, cultural rules that tell us what activities are appropriate and do not interfere with healthy sexual activity. One of the sexual disorders, you've got paraphilia. Paraphilia is the sexual disorders category. And then in the DSM, we break it down into different paraphilias. So you've got fetishism. There's many different foot fetishes. Foot fetish is a big one. You've got exhibitionism. Um, and again, we can go over this in class, but exhibitionism is like the people that wear the trench coat and they go to the park and they're the flashers. Not the Flash, but flashers, like, look at me, I'm naked. Sexual masochism and then sexual sadism. There's S&M. So masochism is getting hurt, and the sadism is the one doing the hurting. Um, find it in sex clubs, stuff like that. And then voyeurism, that is your peeping toms. Those are the ones that hide in the bushes and look through the mirror at the naked women. So those are disorders. All right, so culture and sex, whereas some cultures abhor nudity and view sex only as a means of reproduction. Others believe that children should be educated about sex early in life. I fully agree with that. Question is, where do you think Americans fall on this continuum? Maybe that's a discussion that we will have in class. Sexual motives and preferences vary among people and across time and cultures. Gender disparities in motives exist, but they are small. And that is it. I wanted to keep that short and sweet. Hopefully, when we meet in class, it is something we can explore further. If it is something you would like to cover, let me know. Otherwise, again, it's going to be kind of like a roundtable open discussion. So you know what I like to do at the end of my videos, right? Okay, here we go. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you when I see you. Peace!